And at the end of the day, calories is a measure of heat that then we estimate mitochondrial functioning. Because out of mitochondria, we get ATP, carbon dioxide, free radicals, and these are pretty much the things that will get out of that they interest us. So what we are starting to think is that we know that fat has more potential for ATP molecule compared to glucose. So if you compare 3 molecules of glucose to make 18 carbons, and then you take a fat of 18 carbons, the number of ATPs coming from the fat is higher. Okay? Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, it seemed there was also another advantage, and that seems to be more related to a lower dissipation of energy, so what we call cellular entropy. So entropy would be like chaos, okay? And whenever we have chaos, then seemingly the heat is higher. So if the mitochondria and the cells makes more heat rather than ATP, it becomes inefficient for as far as energy production, but much more efficient in heat. I was reading a reference that was stating that the mitochondria can go up to 50 degrees centigrade, it just as normal. I think, well, someone at that temperature would die, right? Yeah. So seemingly there are a couple of benefits. The first one, that is a more concentrated form of mass or fuel that you can perhaps use, and the same mass you can have the potential for more ATPs. And this actually ties in with the previous question, the fact that maybe the damage created by certain training whilst functioning primarily on fats seems to be less, because one of the theories that we are exploring at present is that maybe the production of free radicals is less, and also the heat, there is less dissipation of heat and more ATP production.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another show brought to you by our friends over at blueblocks.com, the leaders in scientifically proven blue light blocking glasses like the ones that I'm wearing now and the ones that I always wear when I'm on tech, especially in the late afternoon, early evening hours, because melatonin production, growth hormone release, immune response, recovery from exercise can be diminished if you're getting artificial LED exposure from blue light sources such as computers, iPads, Kindle e-readers, cell phones, and so forth. So protect your eyes just like you protect yourself by wearing a seatbelt when you drive. Also, what's new from our sponsor, blueblocks.com, is this new Remedy sleep mask. Now, if you're like me, you travel, if you're in different sleep environments, or if you have light coming into your bedroom from your roommates or your neighbors or, street lights, you definitely need to protect your exposure to light at night, because that small amount of light can negatively affect melatonin release, can affect growth hormone and all that. So they have this new mask. I wear it every night now. It's amazing. Definitely check it out. Go to blueblocks.com and use the promo code HIIT to save 15% off your next order. Hope you enjoy the show. Let's cut right back to it.
Can you define that a little bit? Because I think, it seems to me that so many people are hyperfixated on ketosis, the ketogenic diet in general, because
Absolutely.
It's theoretically going to help them burn fat better, right? But what really, if the end goal is to burn fat better, is that always like high levels of ketones in the bloodstream kind of thing?
Brilliant question, as always. So what is the purpose of getting healthy? Is not, in my view, to lose fat. We are fat because our body is not working optimally-ish. In some ways, there is something that, our endogenous stores of fat, quoting some of the people I mentioned earlier, is an exogenous form of fat that we temporarily store in whichever way we want. The body doesn't necessarily just suddenly one day decide, right, okay, I'm going to take my lean tissue and convert it into fat. It's something coming from outside, right? So our purpose, when I look at someone, I try to understand how metabolically efficient and flexible they are. The bigger is the spread, so the more flexible they are, in my view, the better is their metabolism. the better is their metabolism, the less likelihood they will actually store extra weight. So when people want to lose weight, I try to see that as really making sure that the body functions optimally at a certain level where the body doesn't need to actually store fat. It can utilize efficiently energy from the fat stores. And then eventually will level out. So to me, reaching metabolic flexibility and efficiency is the primary goal. And the side effect is weight loss. Anyone that will store fat on a set, how many people do we know that the caloric value that they have is way below what they would need to store fat, and yet they don't lose a gram? I seem to know quite a few. Mm-hmm. So, well, there must be something going on that doesn't allow. Yeah, we formulated theories and now we started to have a bit more of an idea. So we look at insulin resistance in visceral fat. Amazing work from Gabor Bosi, from one of, still in the group that I tend to consult at times. So there are theories that all point, in my view, to metabolic flexibility. And I think we are going way beyond just what we think as fat, as burning fat. To me, is always important. The most important thing is reaching metabolic flexibility and optimal functioning so the body doesn't need to store fat. We took a bunch of people that we know they were very healthy, metabolically flexible, so one day they could fast, the other day could have 3-4 times a meal a day, and their weight didn't change that much. So we then overfed them between 3,500 and 4,000 calorie equivalent. I don't tend to use the word calorie anymore, obviously. And it was interesting because the worst that someone put on was 1 kilo. And this was for a prolonged period of time. It wasn't only 3 or 4 days. So what actually happened, the metabolic rate speeded up. They felt more energetic. They felt, of course, if you leave that in a chronic state, eventually, I believe, weight will pile on. But at that time, with that kind of challenge, with that kind of insult coming from a dietary source in this case, people were still able to dispose that, to use it, to basically be efficient in disposing the successes. So on the other hand, we have the opposite scenario in which people that are highly hypocaloric, I would call them hypoenergetic, and yet the body doesn't access the stores, they're already there. And this is where some of the theories about, fat cells and insulin resistance and, the production of certain proteins and inflammatory cytokines, kind of continuing this vicious cycle will, I think, hold a lot of truth for future therapies and future direction. But this is my view, or our view.
Really brilliant. So those metabolically flexible people, when they were overfeeding, were they eating more of a lower carbohydrate style diet?
Yeah.
And so the extra energy was kicked off as acetone and acetoacetate.
Yeah. And we tried them all. These were the vast majority. But then I thought, okay, what happened if you just pack them with carbs? Now, interestingly, their lean mass also increased. But interestingly, if we are on a ketogenic diet, you may not have perhaps the same glycogen stores in your myocells and in your muscles as you would normally have on a high carbohydrate diet. So in a way, imagine like a depletion phase of a carb loading, and then you load them up with carbs. What was going to happen? Boom. Because I would refer that as wet muscle.
So water retention.
Water retention with glycogen and, et cetera, et cetera. Like would happen when people load up on creatine after they have been off creatine for a while. They put on. But in this case, would be more likely to be glycogen. So that to me is a good sign. Yeah. That the person is flexible enough that if there is a challenge, the kind of quoting a guy called Raymond Edwards, is the kind of fast well, feed well. And I think there is so much truth in that.
Yeah, it's something I've learned from you, Alessandro, because a lot of people will tell me they're doing a fast and they have exogenous ketones in bone broth and butter in the coffee and MCT oils, and they say they're fasting. But you're really of the idea that, like you said, fast well, feed well. So if you're going to eat. If you're going to fast. Yeah. Now, because if you're having MCT oil, butter in the coffee, exogenous ketones, bone broth, all this, are you really fasting?
Okay. My view is quite Spartan about it. To me, the word fast is fast. So water only. Now, I try to always, once again, understand the purpose that someone is doing something. What is the reason? And to me, it depends what they're wanting to achieve. If what they want to have ketones and want to time restrict feed, add the, fatty coffee with the MCT oils and etc., maybe that's enough for them to have some element of the benefits associated with fasting that are also associated with the presence of ketones in the blood. So there are some benefits to that, but nowhere near the effects that are associated with complete absence from energetic value. Someone quoted, and I can't remember to save my life who was, that after 40 to 50 calories of intake, the body switches off certain mechanisms. So please don't quote me there, because I can't remember the paper of the source, so it could be completely untrue, but it makes a great deal of sense. So we go from a fed state where the body mainly is in an anabolic state. We can create a catabolic state through stress and life load and training and etc., but mainly is an anabolic state. Through fasting, we enter catabolism in order to try to stimulate autophagy and trying to recycle certain proteins and all sorts of processes that are associated, when intermittently done so, with health. Any extreme of those two, then people need to be really aware of what they're doing. If you look at the work of Dr. Walter Longo, for example, he does some great papers and also great points about the fasting. And one of the things that he mentioned is that time restricted feeding does not actually give the same benefit of fasting. Some of them, yes, but in order to get certain benefits, we definitely need to go into a full fast. So depending upon what the person is wanting to achieve, then time restricted feeding could be ample, because maybe they are healthy enough and they want to eat in a certain amount of in the time window, so they can wake up in the morning with really good blood glucose levels and their sleep isn't disrupted, for example. But for some other people, if they have, for example, mitochondrial dysfunction and are healthy enough, even having this mitochondrial dysfunction, perhaps they may have to consider full fast. I don't know if in the longer term, someone that keeps doing time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting will eventually end up having the same result of someone that would actually fast for 3-4 days, but over a longer period of time. This is something else that we thought. But so far we have no data on it. But certain pathways seems to be only affected in a good way when full fast is present. All the rest, I'm not sure.
So full fast, if we could differentiate between intermittent fasting and what you call the full fast.
Correct. So
time frame.
So to me, the time restricted feeding, this is what I call intermittent fasting. There is a certain time in which you restrict the feeding. That's pretty self-explanatory. So the maintaining the 6-hour windows. If you are training, please be careful with that, because vast majority of our subset ended up not great. So I consider time restricted feeding, eating in a window of 6 hours and fasting for the rest. Fasting, not saying I don't have breakfast and then realize I have 300-400 calories in form of liquids with fats and whatever, that once again, it can bump up the ketones. There are benefits associated with that, but it's not fasting, right? Or complete fast is 24-hour fast with water. You may want to, have electrolytes. You may want to have other things, but not of energetic value.
Yeah, really good point.
This is my view, though. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. But if we could kind of define, so a lot of people are we were talking a little bit offline about striving to be in ketosis and things like that. And have we really defined what ketosis is? Some people will say in different books or papers, 0.5 millimolar blood ketones, you're in ketosis. And so that's great. And what really is it? Do we know?
Okay. If you find out, let me know. Because I've been studying that for a couple of years right now, or even more. And so far, the answer that I was given, they were supposed to be like straight answers. I'm not sure if these would actually reflect what is my thinking now. Primarily because, as you very well know, body makes 3 ketones. So how do we define ketosis? Is it the sum of the 3 ketones? Is it as long as 1 ketone is above 0.5 millimolar in blood? Is it when we show acetoacetate in urines, we know that isn't great. It's great in an initial phase, but then the body doesn't seem to want to let go the acetoacetate in urines, and perhaps is using it in a different way, maybe to go through acetone. I don't know. But generally speaking, the understanding is that acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate are produced in a 1-to-1 ratio. And then part of the acetoacetate, upon usage, it gets converted into acetone and then exhale. So when people see ketones in blood, and either because they bump up too high fats, or to me this is the risky way, the not so healthy way, or through fasting, because they reduce the carbohydrate intake and they go for prolonged period without feeding, and eventually the body will make ketones. As I call it improperly, as a buffer. Okay, that is not technically correct, but it's just to give an idea. The body likes to have a certain quantity of readily available change that can be used. But some people would highly argue that, and I totally get their point as well.
So just to qualify that, so the ketones are like a potential energy source.
Correct.
Yeah, so the body can pull it when it needs it. So that's what you're saying right there. Okay.
Correct. So the liver bumps up ketones normally. A very important thing is that in order to do that, the body has to be in gluconeogenesis, unless you take exogenous ketones, of course, which to me is not natural ketosis. Yeah. I mean, if someone has a very, very good, strong session that they need to do and they use ketone esters, then great. Ketone salts, I am still not fully sure, because I've tried left and right, and I don't know, my heart rate was the same, everything else was the same, and then I tried on other people, then I asked around, and I'm not sure if there is a bias, a kind of placebo effect, and people who got the ketone felt amazing. Is that because of the salt that is attached to it? Then maybe they were not having enough salt. So there are too many things that we still can't quantify properly yet. So where do we take the definition of ketosis? What level of acetoacetate? What level of beta-hydroxybutyrate? What level of acetone? Yeah. No one has been able to so far answer that question. If there is someone that you do know that can answer that question and why they came at that conclusion, I'll be very, very happy to explore what they actually think or say. Because 0.5, but there is no acetone, what does that mean then? NAD plus and NADH maybe is not working well. Complex 1 and complex 2 and 3 maybe are not working very well. Do they have too much NADH? And then if they supplement things like, niacin or any other way or fasting, for example, changes the ratio. And then they feel much better, and then we see the needle going towards the acetone. So that means that has gone through acetoacetate. In whichever proportion, we don't seem to know correctly, but has gone down that path. So then do we take acetone and acetoacetate, but our blood millimolar of beta-hydroxybutyrate are really low. So are we gone out of ketosis, or we have modified our ketosis, showing it with another ketone? So to me, I try to look within a range of both. Allowing for that, then we can start to make some maybe suggestions to optimize one or the other one. If I want to start training, I prefer beta-hydroxybutyrate to be a little bit higher, plus some glucose in my personal case, because I have a high intensity glycolytic sport. Is more the kind of type 2B fiber with speed, not necessarily strength, just speed is needed. So it's gonna go quite, glycolytic very, very quickly, and I need that immediate thing. So that to me is there is a definition of the ketone chasers. Yeah, I'm in ketosis. Yeah, are you actually efficient? Are you metabolically flexible? Can you exercise with that? And because you are in ketosis, that does not define you as efficient as using fat as a substrate for fueling.
I think it's really, really interesting. But to kind of summarize what you're saying, so if someone at home is listening to this right now and they want to kind of ascertain whether or not they're fat adapted or not, if they were to feel good throughout the day with a low blood glucose, for example, or to go exercise with a low blood glucose and have moderate levels of, say, beta-hydroxybutyrate, would that maybe be one way to triangulate to see if they're maybe burning more fat for fuel?
I'd go along with that. Yeah, absolutely. My exercising blood glucose in peak performance hasn't really dramatically changed, nor the one of the athletes that we've seen, nor the one of the normal exercises, regular exercises that we've seen. But the before and after, that has dramatically changed. The HbA1c has dramatically changed.
The before and after from high carb to low carb training.
I'm so sorry, I do apologize. Before and after exercise. So at rest, I do apologize.
So there's a big shift, eh?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've noticed you have more like doubling in mine roughly.
During the performance?
Yeah.
Mine hasn't particularly changed. But so wherever is the top reached is more or less within that millimolar. So you're 20 points, 18 points. But the before at rest and after exercise at rest, these have dropped quite substantially. And also it's very different from what you said from before entering a low carbohydrate, high fat diet and after low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Except when you go into overreaching, under recovery, overtraining, call it as you prefer, or there is some form of chronic low-grade inflammation. In that case, even if they reduce the carbs, blood glucose is bumped up. We believe through inflammatory response.
Really interesting. So what would you say to someone that says they've tried the ketogenic diet and it didn't work? They gained weight or they felt terrible or their hormones were off. How would you define that? Because do we know exactly what the ketogenic diet is for different people? So what sort of tips would you offer for them?
Okay, so first of all, whenever anyone comes to me, and normally it's because it's referred. They don't kind of just walk in. And they heard the ketogenic diet is good. This is the most common one I get. The first thing I ask is why? Why do you want to go on a ketogenic diet? Is there a reason? Well, I heard from the supermarket cashier that is good, or that celebrity has tried it, and I don't get involved because it's the purpose to me is very, very important. So let's assume are overweight, they heard it is good, they tried it, and was a disaster. The first thing I try to ascertain is, have they carried out correctly? It is rather unfortunate that most people are on an unhealthy diet. On top of that is high carbs. High carbs does not mean unhealthy, just want to specify that. Or for certain individuals does not mean unhealthy. And within a week, they expect that their cells switch from primarily one fuel to another. Well, it takes 6 days to deplete glycogen stores in an athlete in a certain phase, or 3 or whatever. So imagine for people that are not metabolically efficient. I had some people that to go through adaptation, it took them months. They can show ketones in 2 to 5 weeks or 6 weeks, and that seems to be very congruent with some of the studies that have been published on people reaching ketosis. But that does not necessarily mean that they feel good on that diet and they should be on that diet. So I'm just trying to be very realistic, because I did find some people that I don't think they were suitable for a ketogenic diet. Generally speaking, if they tried and fail, I look the quality. You can go on any diet or on any style of diet and have the healthy diet and an unhealthy diet. I'm sure you are aware, you wrote a book about it. So was there a massive whack of lipopolysaccharide because the microbiome wasn't up to speed and they were just eating, cheese and fried bacon and all of that? Nothing wrong with this food, but if you go from a high carbitarian diet with high gut permeability, with the wrong type of gut flora, well, lipopolysaccharides can cause a substantial amount of havoc. So that's one of the things they definitely would want to look into. So mention gut, quality of the diet, right proportion, and also what is the time lapse that what is their expectation of something that didn't work? In order for my body to be, let's call it, fully familiar with that type of substrate, it took me around 9 months properly, in order to, at any stage, having to use fats, especially in high intensity. And I'll never forget this. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this to you. I put myself through a 2 hours and 3/4 karate grading, completely fasted, just purely on MCT oils. Through that, but I was fasted before. And it was all out, sitting down, all out, sitting down, sparring, sitting down. And we're only allowed to drink once in that test. That's the test. Take it or leave it, like it or not. And I got pretty faint to the point that I was called out and I said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Well, I carry on, because otherwise it's an automatic failure." And I had no intention to fail that. Hence, I put myself through that, make it or not. Mm-hmm. And I did. Since then, I got halfway through, really, really fainty, grey, and then bang, something happened. I don't know if it was my adrenaline kicking in or whatever. But since then, it's never been a problem. But I assume that I have some form of understanding of diet, right? Mm-hmm. So when it doesn't work, I look at the time, quality, and also what did they introduce first? What did they remove? One of the easiest way to make the body more efficient is just start to reduce the actual energetic intake. And one of the best way to adapt to a ketogenic diet, in my view, is actually through time-restricted feeding and fasting.
Is that kind of like a prerequisite or requirement, in your opinion, to really do it successfully?
If individuals are healthy enough, this is what I would go for. One of the people that I'm following right now is really, really interesting. He wrote me an email very, very recently, just before I was leaving to come to the US for lecturing. And he said, really excited, Alex, I have managed to eat only between the hours of 10 and 10. Like he's done something that's never been able to achieve before. He's obese, housebound, arthritis, and he's got 5 major insulin-related type of diseases, and he is constantly eating, and he has no energy. What does that tell you about the mitochondria? So am I going to bump up the fat in this guy and reduce the carbs straight away? I just started to work in the time of the feeding. And for him, it's a massive result. So it depends, I think, how far behind they actually start in order to achieve that. Mm-hmm. In athlete, it happens much quicker. So the more metabolically flexible the person is, the easier is the transition. But the more metabolically inflexible, insulin resistant, and metabolically deranged the person is, the harder it's going to be. So sometimes it's just a question of reducing a bit the carbs without increasing the fat at all. Make sure that the proteins are at the right level. Luis Villaneseur, Mike Julian, Martin Kendall, all these people have done quite a lot of research as far as the protein content. And I found that some people, 1.5 grams per kilo of ideal mass is just not sufficient. For others, is very appropriate. So I think these will be the most salient points I would want to investigate, leaving to aside very specific scenarios in which the person is definitely not suited. Mm-hmm. So carnitine palmitotransferase deficiency, or mutations, or the CAT mutations, or things that we know that the body won't be able to use certain types of fats of a certain length for energy.
Mm-hmm. Really good stuff. So one of the arguments kind of against ketosis in the traditional kind of sports performance community is that, if you're going to do a glycolytic sport that is very short duration, high intensity, you're using sugar for fuel, the benefits are from a ketogenic diet are not really there, because that's theoretically going to enhance more aerobic based fatty acid oxidation. So, but your sport, karate, judo, you found that, which is very anaerobic, very short, very high duration intensity, you found a lot of benefits, and along with your athletes, how would you articulate some of those benefits?
Okay, so everything was going in that direction, and it was our thought as well. And I'd like to specify that I'm not anti-sugar. I'm not. You can ask me a question about insulin, and I would not freak out. I'm happy with insulin. Insulin is our friend as long as we use it correctly. So the reason why I'm saying this is because ketogenic, in my view, has great advantages to use in training, especially if periodized. Okay, so we want to reduce visceral fat. One of my colleagues called Dr. or Professor Daniel Plews, Paul Larsens, Dr. Paul Larsen, they wrote an article about one of their athletes that they found a substantial amount of visceral fat. And I look at the glucose and I went, flip. This over 60% of this person's blood glucose is pre-diabetic. This was one of my ones. And then they came along with their athlete. And then I said, hang on a minute. And I started to do a quick count. 7 out of 10 athletes where we were saying they were basically pre-diabetic. So they have Olympic rowers with blood glucose that, if I would imagine the shape of the person, I would imagine somebody either overweight or mildly obese. Yet they're Olympians, current Olympians, not ex-Olympians that they gone, mad on diet and lack of exercise. So to me, the one of the things that I would definitely want to define is the person suited for the sport? Has the person tested enough in this condition to be able to perform at a certain sport? So for example, for me, I try ketogenic diets in my training 4 weeks into it, and I think, right, it doesn't work because I have nothing left, right? When Big Steve Big Martin in karate comes towards me, he's menacing, right? He's my pal, he's my mate, but he's still gonna tap, he's still gonna go in. And I think, right, okay, I need to speed up here, big time. And there is nothing in the tank. I don't like it, as you may imagine. So, interestingly, after a period of time, that didn't seem to happen any longer. And it always seemed like I had that. The initial phases were very hard, but then bang. So maybe I had glycogen stores enough. Maybe as long as I maintain a certain time gap between harder session, the body has ample time to replenish the glycogen. I'm still going glycolytic. Yet, some people have found that even at a really high glycolytic zone, they think that they're still actually burning fats, which this is not the current trend of thoughts, because we think that fat cannot be burned given a certain constraint of oxygen. And I don't have the answer to that, because I have seen it working, but we cannot quantify it correctly. So we can also add small amount of sugars in order to keep that oxaloacetate pump or cycle. So one of the limiting factors, I was having a chat with one of my colleague, Waco Jaros, and Dr. Tommy Wood in Seattle, and we are kind of chatting now back and forth on certain ideas. And one of the things that I actually asked was, so what's your view? You made a brilliant podcast on oxaloacetate. I'm so sorry. Oxaloacetate, and the fact that on a glycolytic diet we can't actually get it, so we should supplement it. I said, well, no, just add 5 grams or 10 grams, whatever he said, of glucose, and bang, then it starts spinning, right? So I think there are still a lot of theories, but I'm not sure if anyone, or maybe Tommy can quantify, Dr. Tommy Wood can quantify it much better. But the study that we're that we should be publishing in October, our null hypothesis was that ketogenic diet doesn't work with HIIT training, and was measured in GTX, graded exercise. We were reasonably confident that the null hypothesis would, so ketogenic diet doesn't support high intensity training, and we measured that, and it was over a period of 4 weeks. So it wasn't the usual 2 weeks, the ketogenic diet, and there are some studies on 3 days, on 36 hours, and you think, really? 36 hours and 3 days. And it didn't. It worked. So that was a big shock, because we don't mind whichever way it's going to go. We are not attached to a ketogenic diet. We're not attached to a carbohydrate diet. We want to see what works and what doesn't. And we were interested in the ketogenic, exploring the ketogenic limitations. And that to us was the really important bit. We measured different levels of lactates. They dramatically changed. We measured different level of glucose. We measured different level of triglyceride, different level of oxidation. Did we measure oxidative stress? I'm not sure. But there were all sorts of changes in a period of 4 weeks, yet the performance did not drop on the control group or on the ketogenic diet. Mass was different. People on a ketogenic diet lost more mass.
Lean mass, skeletal muscle.
No, fat mass.
Fat mass, okay.
Yeah, fat mass. I can't remember on top of my head what was the lean mass, so don't quote me on that. So we had to go with the alternative hypothesis that ketogenic diet does not impair HIIT performance. Having said that, we can't say the ketogenic diet improves the performance. All we have shown is that it doesn't reduce the performance. And also that is not a specific sport. So you think, oh, okay, according to the study of, Cyprian, Ferretti, Maffeton, Larsen, and Plus, this has shown that ketogenic diet does not drop the performance. We cannot say that improves it. And we cannot actually compare it to a specific sport unless the sport is a graded treadmill exercise, which in my view it isn't, right?
Sure.
We can't say, okay, now people that do CrossFit will benefit. No, we don't. So in my view, is very, very individual. Very, very individual. So people need to first make sure that they don't have any metabolic concerns in relation to maybe some genetic mutations or enzyme deficiencies in order that are suitable. Then need to look at how do they feel on that over a period of what time, over which period, how long is this period, and then look individually for the sport. I have seen patients, daters, athletes, where ketogenic diet works at high intensity. But once again, I specify it works, it's not that improves. So people didn't drop. So to these people you mentioned, I say I would agree in a certain subset of population, but I don't think we can say that across the board, because in some people it works really well.
Mm-hmm. So what I kind of hear you saying is that it's not necessarily a performance enhancement technique in any way, but should someone want to embark on a ketogenic diet, maybe because they have a propensity to gain weight really quickly.
Yes.
Maybe they have blood sugar issues.
Yes.
Maybe they have a past history of head trauma or agitation.
Yes.
So they are doing the ketogenic diet for other applications.
Correct.
And then can utilize that for those health purposes while doing the sport.
Correct.
And not suffering a performance decrease.
That, I would totally agree with that.
So I think that's a really important distinguishing factor. Now, maybe, so we did talk about the body composition issues, the head trauma and so forth. One of the benefits in this conversation a few years ago that you introduced me to that really got me excited about this and down this whole exploration is the improvement in heart rate variability associated with the ketogenic diet. So we mentioned GAD in the brain and HRV.
Yeah.
I think these are two important physiological proxies, if you will, associated with health. Let's talk about that.
Well, I am not sure if you've seen some of the collective data of the people I measured with, and it was really interesting because they had a certain mean, and so obviously when we measure something we want to maintain variable as controllable as we possibly can, because we don't want to change diet and then modality of training and environment and traveling and house and children or whatever. So we maintain as many as precisely as we possibly could certain variables, and we only change the diet. Because normally people that come to me, as you may know or assume, I would ask them to start tracking heart rate variability. So we cross-reference that with blood tests in order to have an idea, and we try to look at a trend. And through the process of the transition from a normal diet to a ketogenic diet, we saw a substantial erratic behavior. So the coefficient of variation, CV, increases substantially, and the body doesn't respond normally to the training any longer. It seems to be a little bit aberrant to change quite substantially. Following that, especially the RMSSD, which is the root mean square of the standard deviation, is one of the markers that has been used the most to score the heart rate variability, seems to go higher and stabilize at that level. And then, especially in high volume sports, seemingly the damage that would occur via the training seems to be less. So the cost to these people of doing that exercise from a physiological perspective seems to be less. But I have seen no studies on it at all.
So just the clients you're working with.
These are just clients I'm working with, doctors and medical teams I am in contact to, and people in the right field of sport. Because when you start to see people recovering slightly faster on the same modalities of training, so following the same whatever they do, they seem to not be so affected by the training or the competition as they would have been on the standard
Goos
diet.
and gels and high carbohydrate.
Yeah.
So basically, if I heard you correctly, a ketogenic style diet associated boost in heart rate variability can offset some of the potential negative downsides of training.
Yeah.
Well, this
is what we have noticed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The executive that's doing the Ironman and the triathlons and the ultra running and those sports where there's a lot of activity, a lot of movement, free radical stresses from so that might be one application.
Correct.
If someone's deciding if a ketogenic diet is good for them or should they do that, that might be one application.
Absolutely. Look at also my Dr. Plews. He just finished an article on this athlete. I think he refers to him as JVC or JCV, one of the two, where he found that he had a substantial, what we call the skinny fat. Mm-hmm. So really, really skinny, very, very low subcutaneous fat. But if I remember correctly, the figures 366 grams, which doesn't sound a lot, but in someone that is at that elite level of athletic performance, that amount in visceral fat is actually quite substantial. I see that with Olympians, ex-Olympians, current athletes that perform at high level, and I keep seeing people in mid-fives and above. And you think, well, there is something not quite right, because the person doesn't seem to be overtraining, doesn't seem to be under recovery, is not into an overreaching period, so they shouldn't be in overreaching period. So when we compare these periods like for like, we might see that some people may do a lot better on a full ketogenic diet, on a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. Some of these people do not show ketones, regardless of the diet we would define as a ketogenic, but do consider that this is a stress, and it can be also an added stress for some individuals. So then eventually we start to see a raise in blood glucose, because they want to do intermittent fasting at the same time, and then have a ketogenic diet, and then they increase the training because they think that they can do more and perform better. But all of these loads eventually can end up not in a good place. So when we want, if we were to decide to put someone on a ketogenic diet, the benefit would be try to reduce the amount of damage creating through the mitochondria by purely burning glucose. Mm-hmm. That, there seems to be more ATP production if the level is low enough as far as, the intensity. And also bear in mind that these people don't train in order to go to a race for who lasts the longest. They go to the race in order to get there the quickest. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why I hold a lot of hope for periodization of training on a ketogenic diet. When you, for the 3/4 of your time, you train on a ketogenic diet, and then when you go at the day of competition, you use what you've got. You use everything you've got. Because in some contests, for me, and for some of these people that we tested it on, when we added the glucose, it was like rocket fuel, but not 60 grams of wine and 30 grams of fructose and binding them together and then having just those. Then the body will use also substrate very, very differently, and perhaps there is a sparing effect for glycogen and glucose, so whatever comes in is used straight away. So yeah, this is what I would consider for athletic performance.
Yeah, really, really good point. Another finding that you and Waco have realized is that when you're burning fat for fuel, it's more efficient energetically, so to speak. So there's more ATP being made and less heat lost. So therefore, the generalized calorie requirements based upon lean body mass may not be on par if you're keto or eating, low carb, high fat versus carbohydrates. Let's talk about that a little bit further.
Yeah, so this all started quite some time ago. So I went for a bike ride, and I tend to use bike rides when I'm a bit, battered and bruised, and just to keep things ticking over, the kind of active recovery thing. But I also like it. And I went medium to low pace. Go back 2 hours later. It was like 2 hour or 3. So anyhow, 1280 calories burned, kilocalories. Then 2 days later, I had my Sunday class in karate session. I was all out. I got back. I was done. I had nothing left. Look at the data, and it was less than 900. And I went, how is it possible? So our friend, Dr. Benjamin Lynch, introduced me to Waco, and I said, look, this doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, give me the data, and we started to do some investigation. So we started to look at all, law of thermodynamics, the first and second, and started to look how calories are calculated. And at the end of the day, calories is a measure of heat. That then we estimate mitochondrial functioning, because out of mitochondria we get ATP, carbon dioxide, free radicals, and these are pretty much the things that will get out of that they interest us. So what we are starting to think is that we know that fat has more potential for ATP molecule compared to glucose. So if you compare 3 molecules of glucose to make 18 carbons, and then you take a fat of 18 carbons, the number of ATPs coming from the fat is higher. Okay? Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, it seemed there was also another advantage. And that seems to be more related to a lower dissipation of energy. So what we call cellular entropy. So entropy would be like chaos. Okay? And whenever we have chaos, then seemingly the heat is higher. So being higher, so if the mitochondria and the cells makes more heat rather than ATP, it becomes inefficient for as far as energy production, but much more efficient in heat. I was reading a reference that was stating that the mitochondria can go up to 50 degrees centigrade, it just as normal. I think, well, someone at that temperature would die, right? Yeah. So seemingly there are a couple of benefits. The first one, that is a more concentrated form of mass or fuel that you can perhaps use. And the same mass, you can have the potential for more ATPs. But another, and this actually ties in with the previous question, the fact that maybe the damage created by certain training whilst functioning primarily on fats seems to be less, because one of the theories that we are exploring at present is that maybe the production of free radicals is less because, and also the heat, there is less dissipation of heat and more ATP production. But unfortunately, no one has really studied that in details, and we are struggling to find any quantitative and qualitative material on that, and we're still applying. So this is where we are looking at different things, and through a gentleman called Paul Itoy, we are trying to get more and more data on food collection and looking at food quotient rather than just respiratory quotient in exercise, in order to use that as a marker to see. In fact, what we are starting to see is that if someone is on a ketogenic style, low carbohydrate, high fat diet and is fully adapted, whatever that means, they would need less calories, but not because they need less calorie to function only, or maybe, but also because the calculation and the estimation based on HIIT calories maybe are not applicable. I was speaking to my colleague from Anglian University, Dr. Justin Roberts, and at the time he mentioned it makes perfect sense, because you think, well, if for someone to stay alive on carbohydrate, they have an FQ, a food quotient of close to 1, as in 0.85 or whatever that is, if we change that fuel onto something that has much lower food quotient, like 0.75 or 0.7, well, we would make less heat. And we also would make less free radicals and more ATP. So that will skew the readings in giving an isocaloric diet is actually not isocaloric. Is relatively hyper-energetic. So our estimation so far, when we show the calculation to my colleagues, and our calculation, our estimate can go between 10 to 20% less.
Calories.
If we count calories, yes. Hence, we drop the calories.
Well, so going back to the time-restricted feeding, compressing the feeding window, so it all kind of makes sense in the sense that you can get away, you can make more energy with less amount of food while it's still maintaining mass.
Correct.
Muscle mass and sports performance.
Correct.
And so if we look at and extrapolate back to all the calorie restriction research and maybe decreased load on the microbiome and gut health over the lifetime of how many tons of food, that might be one beneficial anti-aging effect potentially. Thinking long-term, the marathon of life.
Absolutely. And where is the anti-aging process coming from? Is that because of the less free radical? Is it because the body has the time to heal? Is it because of the autophagia? Is that because of the ketones, epigenetic effect and control? Is what I don't know the answer to that. But maybe it's just a collective kind of thing. And for some people, maybe they just makes them age faster. I don't know. But generally, seemingly, once again, we tend to look at optimal metabolism, and this is our purpose again. So why do we do that? Well, ketogenic diet or low carbohydrate high fat diet can bring substantial advantages, and this could be also transport into anti-aging, whatever that means, or correct aging
optimal.
Rather than optimal aging rather than I'd say that there are applications that are great. I wouldn't be too categorical in this case, because we need to still be flexible, and if it doesn't work for someone, it just doesn't work, and shouldn't try and persist. Yet for the vast majority of people that do certain sport or are affected by certain diseases, I think is a pretty safe guess.
Brilliant. Let's kind of finish up on some of the neurocognitive improvements. I have our CEO friend that runs a large team, and he says, since I've been doing intermittent fasting and ketosis and the whole bulletproof coffee, even my staff and my business partners notice I'm on a much more even keel. What's going on within the brain?
So when I think the two things I would want to look into will be, first one, the constant and level supply of energy, meaning not just because the person is on a low carbohydrate high fat, but because their energy level is constant. So the fuel provision is there all the time. Unfortunately, on a typical standard Western diet, we keep swinging from one peak to another peak, to one peak to another peak. And that can have all sort of detrimental effects. I mean, our colleague Amy Berger just wrote a book about the Alzheimer's antidote, and you think, wow, that's a type 3 diabetes in the brain, right? So we think that insulin only affects, or insulin resistance only affects cells around the body. We don't think about the effect of insulin within the brain. And if you can imagine that if you don't have any energy in your muscle, if you are insulin resistant, well, why the brain should be any completely different? And I don't think it is. So once we use fats are less susceptible for changes within our blood and utilization. So these are the things that simplistically I think will bring great advantage. In addition to that, there are some epigenetic controls that are really, really important. On a ketogenic diet, the ketogenic diet seems to increase the activity of GAD, which is a protein that converts glutamic acid and glutamate into GABA. But you think, hang on a minute, GABA is more of a relaxant, yet at the same time gives clarity. So I think there will be many different reasons why it can be very beneficial for certain individuals, and I'm definitely one of them. And pretty much everyone that entered the fasting I have been dealing with that has a certain degree of health have experienced the mental clarity in the second to third day fasting, more female and male respectively. Okay, so, sorry, male and female respectively. Men is about 2 days and female is more towards 3 days. So, to me, the most simple thing to think about is blood glucose regulation instead of, eating little and often. Yeah, ish. To me, eating little and often, so eating little and often, it may stabilize the blood glucose, maybe, but this is not my data. Most of the people I tested, the glucose was actually going all over the shop. It was more stable than before, but was constantly elevated. And then we started to change a little bit of that, and through the fasting time restricted feeding and ketogenic diet eventually, we started to notice a much better stability, but all a lower level, because the cells became more efficient. So is it the cell more efficient? Is it better glucose balance? Is it because they also got ketones? Is that, I don't think we can define it correctly or singularly more than correctly, but it could definitely be a combination of all of these points. And this is one of the things that I would not want to give back.
Mm-hmm. That's brilliant. So it brings up kind of the final question here. What are you more excited about, low blood glucose or high blood ketones? And so are we striving for the wrong thing?
Definitely low, consistently healthy blood glucose is one of the proxy that I use. Because to me, is what is insulin driving? That is the most important point. That is the most important thing. The fact that I have ketones in blood, yeah, okay, happy. I'm just about to train, brilliant, fantastic. Yeah, to me is having healthy physiological and biological markers and still maintaining flexibility. That's my end result. That's the most important thing. If we know where is insulin at, and we know where the glucose is at, and we know how flexible we are in working in different scenarios and adapting, at the end of the day, our health is a process of adaptation. The better we adapt, the healthier we are. So it's our predispositions given a certain environment. The studies on twins, you change the environment, they change aging, they change health, they change all sorts of things. So to me, glucose as a proxy is definitely what I would want to perhaps focus on. And if they're ketones, great, but I'm not there chasing them. If they come along, they come along. If not, I'm happy.
Love it. That was awesome.